How's it going tonight, guys? So, if you're here in St. Louis, you know how cold it is. It's been freezing, and I know some of you guys that are further up north, you're probably used to this stuff, but I'm not used to this cold weather like this all the time. So, it's been super cold this winter here, and but hopefully this weekend I'm gonna get away from this cold weather, and I'm gonna head down to Arkansas. Gonna be fishing down there on Lake Washita. But tonight, what I wanted to do is share with you guys the story of how I got into fishing. Yep, how did I get started in fishing, and how did I get from where I was to today, as far as fishing goes. So when I was, I don't know, probably about 5 or 6 years old, my grandparents, they used to watch us a lot growing up, and my grandpa, he was an avid golfer, and there was a lot of times where he tried to get me into golf, at an early age, and so one time he decided to take me down to Forest Park to meet some of his golfer friends. He was, retired and used to golf a couple times a week, and had a group of guys that he used to play with down there. And so we were down at Forest Park, and there's a couple guys that were fishing there at the lake, and they had a whole bunch of catfish in a couple of 5-gallon buckets down there. And I was more interested in the fishing than the golfing, for sure. So when I got home later that day, for about the next week or so, I was running around the house asking, my parents, and at that time my grandmother used to watch us a lot when we were growing up, asking her, to go fishing. And what she did was she took a clothespin and tied it on a piece of rope, and said, "Here you go catch a fish." So I think what I did was, that week, I actually went down to a creek that was by our house, and I don't know, I put some bacon or something on that clothespin and was trying to catch a fish down there, but didn't catch anything. And then finally, after begging my parents to take me fishing, my mom one day finally made a decision that, probably changed my life forever. She took me up to Service Merchandise, and we got a little, I don't know what it was, a little Shakespeare rod and reel combo, just a little bitty rod and reel. And we decided to go up to St. Ferdinand Park that day, and sure enough, there was a guy up there at the park, and don't know his name, but he's an older guy. I don't know if he's even still alive, but what he did was he worked for Field and Stream magazine, and he got me all set up. So he took the line and put it through the guides and put the reel on the rod and rigged me up a bobber with a little split shot and a hook. And I think we put some little, what they used to call them, little red wigglers, just little bitty worms. We put them on the hook up there and started catching these bluegill. And it just so happened that my mom, she was off that summer, and the next summer she would take us fishing up at St. Ferdinand Park a couple times a week. And let's just say I got really good at catching the bluegills. And so as I progressed, later on, I was probably about 8, 9, 10 years old, and started getting catching catfish and trying to catch bigger fish. And did a lot of catfishing with various types of stink bait and plastic worms, and ended up catching a lot of catfish out of St. Ferdinand, a couple other lakes. Used to fish January Wabash, and they had a whole bunch of bullheads in there. And and then probably I'd say, as I got more, to about the 5th and 6th grade, I started really getting into the bass fishing. And I was watching these guys on TV like Roland Martin, Bill Dance, Jimmy Houston, and some of those guys I learned a lot of the basics in bass fishing just from watching them, and started fishing quite a bit. Got some plastic worms, some crankbaits, and started bass fishing up at St. Ferdinand Pond there. And back in the day, there used to be what you'd call like an asphalt type bank that went all around the lake, and there was like a little like chicken wire fence that went all around the lake. And back then, you used to be able to parallel those banks up there and catch a lot of 5-6 pound bass. And that lake's totally changed now. That little pond or whatever you call it. They put a whole new concrete retaining wall in all around there. And I don't know if the fishing's as good as it used to be, but we used to catch a lot of 5-6 pound bass. Well, then, as I got a little bit older, my grandpa, I was always heavily involved in sports growing up, and he tried to get me, in the various things. So I played baseball and I did swimming in the summer. And most of the time, my swim practices were in the morning. So after I got done with practice, grandparents used to watch me. So my grandpa, he's always used to ask me, so what do you want to do today? And of course, I always wanted to go fishing. So he would take me to some of the bigger, ponds up here in St. Louis. Like I used to go to St. Ferdinand Park and Sunfish Lake, and really learn how to fish a lot of different lures on those little ponds here in St. Louis, because they got a lot of timber, and both those places had a lot of bass in them. And so I got to where I learned how to use a bait caster, and pretty much taught myself how to catch bass on a lot of different lures at those parks. And and so I'd say it was about high school that really started to fish a lot. My parents they were always working, so my mom, she used to drop me off at a lot of the different lakes around St. Louis, little ponds, and I just spend the whole day out there fishing. She dropped me off in the morning before she go to work, and she picked me up when she got off work. And I was just fishing all over the place, fishing all the time. And a lot of my summers I spent fishing all day long when I was just a kid growing up. And then when I finally got a car in high school and started working at Cabela's, I met a buddy of mine, Josh Bracamontes. He was a cashier at Cabela's when I was working there, and he had a little 16-foot bass tracker, and we used to take that little boat all over the place over in Illinois, and fish a lot of the different little lakes over there. And he showed me a lot about different types of fishing. Got into some tournaments with him. He was fishing the BFLs and some other tournaments back then, and we used to go fishing all the time. And then I actually ended up going to college at Truman State University up in Kirksville, Missouri. And for those of you that don't know much about Truman State, it's located in Kirksville, Missouri, which is the northern part of the state. And there's a whole lot of good little lakes up there. There's Thousand Hills and Hazel Creek and Long Branch and Thomas Hill. It's a power plant lake up there. And so spent a lot of time that first year in college, because I actually saved up enough money to get my own little 16-foot boat, just running around, fishing, all that stuff. And back then I was pulling a boat with I think it was like a 98 Plymouth Voyager. It was like a really old minivan, and I used to take that little 16-foot tracker all over the place up there. And growing up in a family, nobody fished before, and so I had to learn how to run the boat all on my own. And that was a real learning experience. Learning how to back up a trailer, and just had a blast with that little boat. And I remember even taking that little 16-foot boat down to Table Rock Lake for a college tournament freshman year. And one of my buddies, Ed, we ended up getting first in that tournament on Table Rock Lake out of that little 16-foot tracker. And against Drury's college fishing team, which that was their home lake at the time. And so after about a year of fishing out of that little boat, believe it or not, somebody actually hit my boat when I was on the highway and totaled everything, totaled my boat and my van and everything. And so I ended up getting a new truck, and that year ended up working and saving up and won some of these tournaments and actually got into a little 17-foot nitro with a 75 horsepower motor on it. And it was my first fiberglass boat, and loved that boat. But actually, I forget, actually, like before I had that boat, though, I had an old Champion. I had a real old little Champion bass boat. It was like an 18-footer, and I think it had a 200 on it, and it was like super old. It was like an 82 or something. And I ran that for about a year before it crapped out on me. And then, fished a lot of different little tournaments out of that boat. And then actually, like I said, ended up saving some money, winning a couple tournaments in college to where I could afford to buy that white nitro that had that 75 on it. And it was a newer boat, and ended up taking that all over the place while I was in school, fishing those little lakes up there. And all those lakes had a horsepower restriction on it, so boat was perfect, with that 75 on it to get around and fish all the time, in between working and classes and stuff. And so about my sophomore year is when FLW started up the college fishing, and we started a team up at Truman State University and got into those college tournaments. And the first year we fished it, we ended up qualifying for the regionals, and we ended up getting sixth and just missing going to the national championship. And the next year we fished it, we ended up getting in the top 5 in I think 3 out of the 4 qualifying tournaments. Ended up going to the regional and getting second place, and then placed 10th in nationals. And I think the nationals, there was quite a few guys that were pretty good fishing. Jordan Lee was fishing that tournament back in the day. So, I mean, there's some pretty good fishermen in that national championship. And, so I had a lot of success fishing, the FLW stuff in college, made the All-American team, went to the national championship with FLW. And so when I got out of college, what I did is the day after I graduated, I moved down to Lake of the Ozarks, because I wanted to, try to start a career in fishing. Well, I was like super young and, pretty inexperienced, looking back on it. And, but, I had some early success, moving down to the lake. So, ended up fishing out of that little white nitro and, fished a Wednesday night tournament, which is probably one of the toughest tournaments that you can win on Lake of the Ozarks. I think it's either a 3 or 3.5 hour tournament, but we ended up having over 20 pounds and getting first place in big bass the second time we fished it. And at that time, I think it was kind of, sort of the kiss of death in a way, because, when you show up like that and you hadn't really been fishing that long and you win, a tournament like that, a lot of people probably aren't going to help you too much with teaching you how to fish. And so, we had a lot of tough tournaments, after that, where we were really struggling to figure it out. I mean, we always were able to catch, over 14 or 15, 16 pounds a tournament, but, we didn't really quite figure out how to get those 20-pound bags. And, we're having a hard time, and that's what you need to do in order to get paid, all the time down at the lake. So spent a couple years, fishing hardcore. Worked a lot of weird jobs down at Lake of the Ozarks, and really, got a lot of experience fishing down there. Learned a lot about fishing in the lake, and I'd say, after you spend a lot of time fishing like that, you start really figuring out what it takes in order to do better in the tournaments, and how to fish these lakes. And it's not as glamorous as a lot of people think, like how you go about breaking down a big lake like that and, finding fish. There's certain little tricks you can do to make it a lot easier. Well, spent a couple years doing that, and it was pretty obvious that, there's still a lot to learn, and I had a college degree, so I decided to move back from the lake, move up to St. Louis, because I knew that, I'd have to find some work, that would allow me to fish and, pay for my fishing. So started working in a lab, did that for about a year and a half, doing contract work. And then got a job full-time up in St. Louis working overnights, working the night shifts, and worked a couple years like that. Well, then ended up meeting my wife, and at that time I was pretty much kind of out of fishing. I'd fish some tournaments like the Big Bass Bash every so often. When I was working, did pretty good one year in it. Won one of the hourlies, but just kind of fished locally, just little stuff. Whenever I had time, because I was more focused on work. Well, then after meeting my wife and getting married, she convinced me to get back into tournament fishing because she knew it was something that I really love to do. And so, we moved out to Lake St. Louis and I started fishing again. I had an old boat, an old Stratus with a 200 on it, and started running around to Mark Twain and going down the Lake of the Ozarks a couple times a year, and really started getting back into it. But at that time I'd pretty much had sold a lot of my fishing gear and just kind of had some real cheap tackle, and pretty much my tackle bag was like a little Walmart shopping bag at that point because I'd been out of fishing for a while. Well, then last year, I decided to really try to get back into fishing and see what I could do, because it'd been some time, and I probably learned more about fishing when I wasn't fishing than I did when I was doing it all the time, because I was able to step back and get a different perspective on things, just taking some time off, which I mean sometimes it's good for everybody just to kind of take some time off and really start to examine some of those blind spots that you don't see when you're when you're caught up in the moment and fishing and all the time. So ended up last year fishing a lot of the BFLs and did really good. Had 9 top 10s in the BFLs last year, and just missed winning one of the tournaments by an ounce, and so that really hurt. But I'm starting to think maybe I can do something with fishing again. Had that success last year, went to the regional, almost made the All-American, and so we're gonna give it a run this year and see what we can do. Fishing is one of those things you got to be real persistent. There's a lot of guys right now that are out there that are fishing, that are pretty good at fishing, and the information has come such a long way since when I used to fish in college. I mean, everybody pretty much knows a lot of the different tricks and different ways to catch fish nowadays, and really what it's about is grinding through those tough tournaments and looking forward to those good tournaments, and trying to keep a positive attitude as you keep on fishing. So we're going to see, how this year goes. March is a big month for me. Got a lot of different tournaments going on, and I'm sure, one of these tournaments is going to pay off, and we're going to do really good in it. So you guys need to stay tuned. If you guys like this channel, please like and subscribe to the page. We'd really much appreciate it. We're trying to grow this channel. We're going to have more information and fishing as the season progresses here. We've just been really cold up here in St. Louis. It's made it really difficult to do a whole lot right now with just how bad the weather's been. So if you guys just stay tuned, we're going to have a lot of different stuff coming at you here, especially this month. I've got a tournament nearly every weekend. Some weekends I have a double header. So we're going to be sharing a lot of different information, and you guys are going to see some ups and downs with tournament fishing. I know this year didn't start out the way that I had planned. Went down the Okeechobee and had a relatively mediocre tournament, as far as my standards go, but felt like I learned a lot in the process. And then last weekend, 2 weekends ago, I was on Lake Hamilton and ended up having another bad tournament down there. But I think just, the weather and a lot of different things had a lot to do with it as well. And so, this weekend we're supposed to have some good weather. It's supposed to be pretty warm down at Lake Washita. So, hopefully the fish are going to get turned on. They're going to bite. But you guys like and subscribe to the channel. Drop your comments below. And, going to be bringing you guys a whole lot of fishing this year. So stay tuned.